Okay, folks, what we're going to do is I'm going to walk through some of the key points of Lecture 1 from Thursday night. Obviously, we had some technical difficulties and things like that on Thursday. So this is going to be an abridged version of what appeared in the Thursday night class. Obviously, review at your leisure if you so desire. As as I mentioned, most of my presentations are going to be pretty no frills. There's going to be a few illustrations here and there. It's mostly about the content. I'll be adding commentary throughout the course on firsthand experiences, and some of them colorful and so on and so forth. So hopefully we'll keep it a little bit interesting. Really quickly, what we'll be going through is acquisition. Tonight we will be doing an acquisition. And we will be going specifically through syllabus highlights, which will be pretty important. There are many different facets of the syllabus that you need to be aware of and cognizant of. We're going to talk at a high level of what is digital forensics and forensics in general. We're going to talk about the scientific method, how that plays into and its role within digital forensics. We're also going to talk about investigative authority, and then we're going to try to wrap up the class with computer components. Now, the syllabus that I've provided actually has quite a bit of the background for myself. I've got quite a bit of different and somewhat lengthy IT experience, and I've got a corporate background in business and things like that. If you're interested in more on that, you can certainly look it up via the LinkedIn link in the syllabus. From a forensics qualification perspective, I do hold a CISP. I'm also certified as an examiner for both guidance EnCase and access data forensic toolkit tools. So we're going to just go ahead and move on. To start the class, what we're going to do is because the class is rather large, everyone is going to have to follow the directions that were placed into week 1 to follow an acquisition. You're going to use the USB drive that's provided. Obviously, please take care of the equipment. This is personal equipment. It's actually pretty expensive. And the write blocker is used to make sure that no mistakes are made in copying the drive and accidentally writing to it. So in essence, we want to preserve the data on the drive so that it is an exact duplicate so that we can work with the duplicate, not the original. Okay? So please follow the steps on that. We're going to move through the rest of the presentation here. So from a syllabus perspective, I really strongly caution you to read the entire syllabus. You never know, there might be a question on one of the quizzes. So from a key perspective, you need to understand that classroom attendance, especially for this course, will be exceptionally important. Anything beyond one absence can actually cost you a passing grade in the class. There's a lot that we go through in a very short time. Even many people with IT experience do not feel comfortable in this space. And we will be giving examples throughout the course on how general IT people, even experienced IT people can actually severely bork. That's not, well, I guess somewhat a technical term, all sarcasm intended. They can seriously bork a forensic investigation for you by just starting to poke around. There's some key things that you need to understand about how that impacts you. This will be a reading intensive course. There's actually 2 books. We're going to show those in a minute here. We also focus on, there's 4 discussion boards that are subjects to actually enhance the discussions and content of the class. All quizzes, and I firmly believe that in an IT program that most IT folks, if you don't know the answer to something, you're actually going to Google or to the internet and you're doing searches or you're hitting sites. From my perspective, all the quizzes and any tests that you're going to be facing in this class are going to be open book, open Google, so as to speak. That's pretty natural in the IT environment, and it's something that you need to be able to leverage very effectively. So it's something that if you don't know how to do well now, you really need to help build that up, and obviously an open book, open Google for quizzes will help enable that for you. If you don't read anything, obviously you're not even going to know what to look for in order to answer questions. So, you're still going to have to read the material and sit in the lectures to understand the questions, to even be able to query the correct things. So it's not going to let you off the hook, so as to speak. So And of course, as opposed to a final presentation or a final exam, I actually prefer to run with a actual final project. We will be doing a little bit larger than your regular assignments. There will be a final project involving data exfiltration. So you will be asked to answer whether an executive stole data or trade secrets from the company that they were working for. And we will cover how you're going to get there. So we'll get there in a minute. So from a grammar and spelling perspective, I often get asked, what is your expectations for grammar and spelling? Obviously, I think there's a big variance with professors depending upon subject matter. Obviously, I'm going to tell you right now, grammar and spelling in a course like this is exceptionally important. Court reports and things that are going in front of lawyers and judges, and that's in essence the trade that you're beginning to learn in this class, means that grammar and spelling is exceptionally important. However, I will say I use a business style prose, so it's very direct, very factual, very unemotional. For you, I would obviously recommend that you follow a similar fashion. The key components that I'm going to be looking for in your writing, if you're using a product like Word or any word processor, there absolutely should be no red squiggles, no red lines indicating a spelling error. That's just not really acceptable. You should be running spell check and correcting those before you turn the work in. And then from a grammar perspective, I'm not going to get too geared up over subtle nuances in grammar, but you still need to make sure that basic grammar is adhered to. If there's issues with the writing that I'm seeing from you, obviously, first assignment or two, there's going to be some corrective suggestions, and then if those aren't made or you continue to struggle with that, the grammar mistakes will begin to impact your work. All right, but I cannot stress enough the significant impact of grammar and spelling in a trade which digital forensics relies heavily upon. Your work, in essence, and what is put in front of everybody who decides really whether you're worth your salt or not, is a written report. So I cannot stress enough the importance of writing and accurate spelling and being concise in what you produce as reports. So we're going to move on to before I get into, I'll do course composition, and then we're going to hit the syllabus. So course composition. I've used this in classes before. This is built to be incremental. So we're going to try to start you off, for those of you who have little to no IT experience, we're going to start you off. All of the readings, all of the assignments are all going to build your knowledge level from basic level up to the point where you should be able to complete the final. And you should be able to get an A on that. All of the tasks and everything that you will need to be able to leverage in that final will be displayed or required in order to complete classroom assignments, classroom exercises, or homework assignments. All of those will lead up to what you will need as a skill set to complete that final. All right, so that final is in essence really kind of a portfolio of your work in this class. Now, our primary forensic suites that we're going to be using, I am pretty sweet on NCASE. I like Guidance Software and what they've done with NCASE. In particular, their actual book, which is the study guide, which we'll see in a minute in the syllabus, is a very well-written book. Unfortunately, FTK does not currently have that, at least not publicly available for sale, or at least that I'm aware of at this point. So you will also need internet access, a laptop or a desktop where you plan to do the work, and there is a limited number of licenses. So there are multiple classes using these licenses, and I strongly recommend that you do not wait until the 13th hour to try to finish an assignment. If everybody else is on and you cannot get on and get a license, you really haven't planned well. I would also say that in much of the feedback and things that I've heard from students in the program is that if you have taken the project management class, you will need to leverage project management skills and methodologies in order to stay on schedule and complete the tasks required for this class. It is very important that you come up with a plan and then you sit down and say, I'm going to do this amount of work at these increments in order to meet the deadlines. It is very important that you meet deadlines. Items cannot be accepted late. So you really, really need to make sure you manage your time wisely. We're going to actually break out of the presentation here. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at, we're actually going to look at syllabus. So this course actually has two textbooks. There is the Digital Forensics Explained, which is by Dr. Godwin. That is one of the textbooks in the readings that we have. The other is the NK Study Guide, which I briefly mentioned before. We will primarily be using a mix of online lectures and presentations and videos, as well as in-class lectures, classroom lectures, presentations, and activities. We will be doing predominantly individual assignments. Some of your classroom assignments will be group work. There was a discussion forum, and as mentioned a couple times, there is a final project. The course objectives for this class are to demonstrate an understanding of digital forensics methods and techniques. You should be able to demonstrate an understanding of scientific method, which will include construction of test-testable theories, testing for and against a theory, and verification of test outcomes. You should also be able to demonstrate digital and cyber forensic investigation techniques, such as identify and source system artifacts for investigative outcomes, utilize one or more forensic suites and tools in an investigative context. You should be able to deal with planning and operational responses associated with digital forensics, at least at a cursory level, and you should be exposed and be able to, at least to a certain degree, address or discuss legal and ethical implications associated with this particular discipline. Now, from an assessment perspective, basically every assignment is due on the Sunday of that particular week at 11:59 or 23:59 system time. Blackboard is what you should turn into. Late work will not be accepted unless there is a documented emergency, and you are only allowed to miss one class, which I have mentioned. I will probably mention again. There's a series of quizzes that are multiple choice, as mentioned, open book. Discussions, you should be posting by Wednesday, your original post, and then posting 2 replies by Sunday on the deadline. This is my rubric for how I grade those. In essence, there will be no makeup exams, quizzes, or assignments, or discussion question postings. This is a fast-moving class. You must stay on task. From a perspective of content and work, you will have 3 individual assessments valued at 50 points each. You will have 5 individual assignments valued at 90 points each. You will have 7 classroom participations, which is attendance and participation within the class at 20 points each. And then you will have 2, there will be classroom activities in almost every class. However, 2 of those will be class assignments that are in fact graded. Excuse me. And then of course there are 4 discussion boards and the final project, which makes up over 10% of your grade. All right. The point breakdown is on the right-hand side, and it is important to note that you cannot miss more than 1 week of class. And you must have completed 80% of the course material to even be able to complete a contract to receive an incomplete. From a weekly schedule perspective, it moves pretty fast. I've outlined here the classroom session and generally what we cover. And then there's actually the weekly work and what you should be working on for that particular week. Okay? I'm not going to read these individually. That's your responsibility, and you should be using this to plan how you're going to work. I would like to stress that we do expect professional and polite conduct within the classroom. There have been situations where students have been, we will say, unruly or rude to both students and to instructors. That is not acceptable. Obviously, FERIUS expects a standard business professional approach in the classroom from all individuals. It's important that you do not necessarily have to agree with everybody, but you certainly need to be polite and respectful, and that goes a long way. All right? Please refrain from cell phone use or general device usage not associated with tests with the class. That will impact your classroom participation scoring. It is also important for you to understand that within this field, we do not like to see folks that learn information here you can utilize that information to, in essence, go dark. That has happened. We do tend to watch for that, and we do discuss individuals if they appear to be going down that path. I strongly recommend that you don't do that. If anything is done of a criminal nature or any acts that violate privacy or create conflicts with the ethics statement, you should contact the instructor immediately if you witness that. And if you are actually participating in those items, you may be subject up to and including criminal prosecution for anything that you would be doing that would be illegal, and you would also be subject to any infractions or discipline that Ferris would want to associate with that as well. I cannot stress the need for a strong moral center enough in this particular class and in this particular field. All right. Of course, plagiarism, as I'm sure you've heard many times in Ferris classes, will not be tolerated. We also obviously embrace diversity. If you have any accommodation needs, please contact me privately and we will address that. All right. We're going to go back to the course composition and move into forensics in general. So if you're going through Digital Forensics Explained by Dr. Goglin, you will note immediately that in his book, he lists out that some of the first publications on forensic science were in China, and they were in a book that's loosely translated as Washing Away of Wrongs. It was really a Chinese book on ways of dying. So that was one of the obviously earliest versions of actually published forensic reviews or forensic science, if you will. Los Angeles in 1930 was the first crime lab. So those are some things that I will say that you probably want to take note of for a quiz. Digital forensics is, in fact, an application of scientific principles. Those are for the discovery of information, and those are often off of digital devices. All right? I would like to draw a distinction between digital forensics and incident response. And from that perspective, I'd like to call out that examination of a live or running device is, in fact, at least from my perspective and view, an incident response. The event is in progress, or something is still running. When you're dealing with a running device, you can obviously quickly alter evidence, or you can alter digital artifacts quickly. So an incident response is somewhat different than digital forensics. I would classify digital forensics as a post-mortem investigation after the event has completed. Now, with that in mind, digital forensics is application of crime investigation, and it is after a crime or event is committed. Now, with crime investigation, as you look at even in the physical forensic space, there is a cross-transfer of evidence. So if I have a perpetrator at a crime scene, as they move and operate within that crime scene physically, they are either leaving, well, they actually are leaving traces of their presence, and they are potentially picking up traces of that scene on their person. All right, so they are actually altering the scene, and that alteration goes both ways. Both the perpetrator alters the scene, and the scene may alter or leave fibers or dust or other things on the actual perpetrator. Now, digital forensics is similar. It is similar in the fact that actions in the digital environment are either logged or it leaves remnants or artifacts, potentially on the source system or the destination system. If you're actually just working with a desktop or a laptop, obviously you're altering that as you're using it. Now, you may be connecting over a network, and you may be creating traffic, which may be logged, and there's all of these other things that may create remnants that can be examined later to determine what happened. Now, when we move into digital forensics, we really need to understand that it definitely includes, with crime and incident investigation, the application of scientific methods. So what does this mean? It means that we should have a hypothesis. So that is, what is the question, or what is the question we're trying to answer, or what are we trying to determine? And that's actually dictated by our investigative authority and by the requester, but we'll get into that in a minute. Now, when you're using scientific methods, you should be utilizing documented digital artifacts to prove and disprove your theories or questions. Now, you should be testing that theory, and I would like to point out that Dr. Goglin strongly stresses, even after you've tested that theory and you obtain results, you need to verify those results. As we get into some of the discussion boards, we're actually going to go through quite a few different video clips on the Casey Anthony trial, the role that digital forensics played in that, and in particular, there's some verification of results that will come out in those videos. It's very important to watch that and understand that how those things impact court case outcomes. All right? What you do from a scientific method perspective must also be documented fully. And the reason for this is so that your work and your results and your conclusions can then be assessed through a duplicatable, repeatable process, which I tend to call a DRIP, which isn't exactly a great name, but it definitely drives home the fact that it needs to be duplicatable, and it needs to be repeatable, and it needs to be a process that somebody else can run. Okay? Now, as a forensic examiner, you really need to understand that even for seasoned IT people that have moved into the forensic examiner space, there's going to be a lot of times where you're seeing something for the first time. It may not even be documented. You may be dealing with software that has very little documentation, and you have to assess and determine what actually happened. So this puts us in the space of generally a forensic examiner just kind of needs to be able to figure things out on their own. Dr. Goglin would say you need to be good at puzzles. I like to view it as I want to know how things work. I wouldn't necessarily say I'm great at puzzles, but I am definitely, I feel that I'm very comfortable in disassembling things and looking at them and seeing how they work, and in order to determine how things turned out the way that they have. Now, you also have some requirements as an examiner. Unfortunately, this field, you will see and learn things about people through your investigations that you will not be able to talk about. You may be asked in on an investigation, and you may find out that some particularly unsavory events either happened, or a firing will happen, and you can't talk about it because they're preparing to release somebody. There's situations like that. You obviously are going to be in some very politically and socially difficult situations. You may have to deal with investigations that involve infidelity. There's child exploitation, which obviously is very difficult to deal with. And in order to get through some of the challenges, and we're going to talk about this in one of the later weeks within the course, you really need a strong moral center, and you really need to be able to deal with these things. All right? And I'm not trying to scare you away from this field, but you certainly need to understand that there is a price for knowing some of the things that you will know by doing this profession. All right? I think Dr. Goglin expresses that very, very well in some of the later chapters within his book. Now, I'd like to call out some special notes that practicing forensics, you usually, at least from my perspective, I would categorize it into three groups. You're working directly for a company or organization that you are doing forensics for. I would like to stress that you should be trained and certified to do that. If you make mistakes, especially if those things, and I will tell you now, no matter what anybody tells you, even if they fully intend it when they tell you, that they will not hand your report out to a lawyer or to a judge. That may be true at that given moment, but if things go sour, they will hand that off in a heartbeat. Always assume that anything that you write that describes the work that you've done will end up in a court of law, and make sure that you write it accordingly. If you do not, people may construe that you made mistakes. And in this field, if you are publicly viewed as making mistakes, your credibility will drop. If it drops too far, you will not be employable. So it's very important that you understand those things. In the police realm or in law enforcement realm, they are trained, but they're not always certified. Some may be certified. They may not have an IT background. But the law enforcement actually has a very different approach, or I should say very different situation. If they make mistakes, it's okay. That's not always viewed that strongly, or it's not critiqued that strongly right now. And that's just the nature of the beast. There's kind of a reputation with being a law enforcement officer. And I'm not trying to create any animosity there. It's just the nature of the beast. When you wear a badge, there's just a certain perception that the public has of police. If they make a mistake, those are often forgiven, unless they're obviously very, very bad mistakes. But obviously, mistakes don't necessarily have the same consequences for a law enforcement officer as they do for an investigator that's working for a private company or organization. Then, of course, there's private investigators, which are basically on contract hire. And in the state of Michigan, you need to have specific IT certifications and forensic certifications, and you must be licensed. And we'll talk about that in a second here. And again, there's consequences for mistakes, or your reputation will take a hit. When we talk about child pornography, any underage nude pictures or sex act images or anything like that, anytime you're dealing with a child pornography or exploitation or abuse case, please keep in mind, as soon as you become aware that that is in fact what you're dealing with, or you strongly suspect that it is, you should immediately discontinue that investigation, should immediately be turned over to law enforcement. You cannot even print a copy of an image for a lawyer without it being considered distribution of child pornography. It's a very serious offense. You need to take that seriously. And then as a side note, in many, many states, there is specialized training required to even interview children throughout the course of the investigation when you're trying to stop the perpetrators. And again, this falls very squarely within the realm of law enforcement. And as working for a private company or organization, or as a private investigator, you need to avoid those, because it is illegal for you to handle those cases, unless, of course, you are asked in by the law enforcement community. Now, I would like to stress that the International Organization on Computer Evidence has 6 principles that should be guiding forensic investigators. All general and forensic principles must be applied to digital evidence. All actions taken should not alter evidence, well, unless, of course, it has to. We'll talk about that a little bit, but for the most part, you really need to understand that you should not be altering evidence, period. When accessing original evidence, you should be trained specifically to do that. All seizure, access, storage, and transfer of evidence must be fully documented. While evidence is in your possession, you are in fact responsible for its seizure, access, storage, and transfer. And any agency responsible for seizing, accessing, storing, and transferring evidence is obviously also responsible for compliance with all 6 of these principles. So when we talk about evidence storage, transfer, etc., that's why you hear things like evidence lockers in the law enforcement community, and so on and so forth. Now, investigative authority is a very important concept in the realm of digital forensics. As an examiner, you are granted authority to conduct an investigation when you are in fact a law enforcement officer who is either requested to, or based off of solicitation from different parties, you are moving in to conduct an investigation. That may be law enforcement or military. If you're a private examiner working for a company, you may be requested by a superior to, maybe we've got somebody who's quitting, and as they quit, there's a standard review procedure of their laptop and hard drive to make sure that there was no data exfiltration or stealing of trade secrets or things like that. That's not uncommon from an HR review perspective when somebody exits an organization. You also, as a private investigator on contract, you also, it would be similar to a private examiner. Except you may be contacted by a company to come in and assist them because they do not have any in-house examiners available. You must also be licensed, especially in the state of Michigan. If you conduct a forensic examination for hire, meaning for pay, and you do not have proper PI credentials with the state of Michigan and you are not licensed, it is in fact a felony. Once you obtain a felony in the state of Michigan, you in essence will not be able to get a private investigator license. So please keep that in mind. Now, as you begin to create or begin an investigation, you should be documenting who or whom, so which parties requested the investigation, what they're asking you to do. So in other words, what do you have the authority to review? If they say, we want you to review Dave Skipper's laptop to see if he is stealing trade secrets from an organization, and you come across in that investigation the fact that Dave Skippers is guilty of infidelity, that's not part of your investigation's rule of engagement or protocols. So that is not necessarily something that you just go in and look for everything. You go in and look for what you've been asked to look for. Now, if we go back to the example that I gave earlier, which was we're looking to see if Dave Skipper stole trade secrets, let's say. in that course of investigation, you come across information that leads you to believe that Dave Skippers may have been committing fraud and stealing funds. Now, you would go back to the people who gave you the request and contact them if you have a question about should you expand your scope, and ask them if I should expand my scope. They would be the decision makers on that. You don't get to just go in and say, I'm going to review this particular person or device for everything. Frankly, it can take you weeks or months to do that, so you're going to have to pick and choose. So what we're talking about here is somewhat similar to a search warrant from a CJ perspective. There's generally, it may be somewhat open-ended, but you're definitely looking for certain things, and that's often restricted on what you can and cannot look for. So that's the concept of rules of engagement from an investigative authority perspective. I think at this point I'm going to break. We're going to stop this right now. That gives you a good introduction. Once we get into the computer components and things like that, we're going to start getting into some of the nitty-gritty. So that pretty much sums a lot of the intro on the course. And then we're going to go ahead and stop here.